This is Dr. Wu on vitamin D. Today, we find out how much vitamin D we get from the sun in a single day. It's more than you might think. Are we overdosing? Let's find out. First, what does the sun do? 3 steps. Our skin always makes 7-DHC. The sun hits that 7-DHC, turning it into previtamin D, which turns into vitamin D. This is the classic model. If nothing stops this, we can quickly overdose on vitamin D in the sun. But do we? What happens to people living in full sun? In 2007, Dr. Neil Binkley measured vitamin D of 93 healthy Hawaiians who averaged more than 4 hours a day in the sun. Their vitamin D levels, shown as 25 OHD, all stayed under 70. The upper limit for normal is typically somewhere between 50 and 70. Okay, how about even more sun? In 2012, Dr. Martine Luxwolda measured vitamin D of 60 traditionally living tribesmen of East Africa. Again, everybody's vitamin D remained under 70. Why don't they exceed that? How can they be normal with so much sun? Let's revisit our 3 steps and find a way to limit vitamin D production. Skin tone can darken to reduce sun exposure, but that takes time. It can't protect you in one day. What about using up all your 7-DHC? It's a good guess, possible. Or does something else interfere with vitamin D formation? Also possible. In 1981, Dr. Michael Holick, a big name in vitamin D research, found an answer. Our body diverts previtamin D away from vitamin D production by changing previtamin D into photoproducts, lumisterol and techisterol. This decreases the previtamin D available to make vitamin D. Let's see how he found this out and see if you agree. In a brilliant experiment, Dr. Holick shows us what happens to the skin chemistry in excess sunlight. He took human skin samples removed from adult foreskin and placed it under a lamp, simulating summer sunlight while he kept remeasuring the chemistry for 8 hours. The chemicals he tracked start simply as 100% of it as 7-DHC, shown in the blue line, with nothing else. No photoproducts. Turn on the lamp and 7-DHC turns into previtamin D, as expected. But then, something unexpected. Almost all of that conversion is done in only 10 minutes. After previtamin D shoots up, lumisterol and techisterol both sharply increase. Techisterol, shown in the light blue line at the bottom, appears to reach max very quickly. Lumisterol, in orange, appears to have no max. Around 30 minutes, previtamin D maxes out despite 80% of 7-DHC still remaining. After that, lumisterol resembles a mirror image of 7-DHC, meaning that 7-DHC is essentially only changing to lumisterol under further light. This means that our body doesn't protect us from vitamin D overdose by running out of 7-DHC. In this experiment, we had plenty remaining when previtamin D production maxed out. Instead, our body protects us from vitamin D overdose by limiting previtamin D. Since the excess sunlight just goes into lumisterol production, previtamin D stays at a safe level. And with previtamin D levels safe, the vitamin D it would produce should also be safe. This entire process is regulated within the skin. However, the precise mechanism of this regulation remains unknown. We only know that it happens because we see it happen in Dr. Holick's experiment. He took his experiment further and tried it on different skin tones. Although you still make the same amount of previtamin D, eventually, it takes longer to reach the max with darker skin. Skin tone is measured by Fitzpatrick typing, shown in the bottom chart. Instead of 30 minutes to reach max with type 3 olive white skin, it can take 3 times longer, up to 3.5 hours with type 6 black skin. Great, now we've got lumisterol built up in our body. Are we sure it doesn't do anything else? Are there side effects? Not that we know of. It's an active field of research with small studies proposing new pathways, regulation, and revealing what they don't do. Let's see one of these studies. One of the main functions of vitamin D is to increase calcium absorption from food. But despite a similar molecular structure, lumisterol and techisterol don't do this. A 1961 experiment with 20 rats showed only vitamin D increases calcium absorption from food. They gave the rats 4 weeks of vitamin D, lumisterol, techisterol, or no supplement. Then they gave him food with a special calcium, calcium 45, which has 25 neutrons, while normal calcium only has 20. We use this special calcium 45 to track its absorption. They let the food digest, then measured how much of that special calcium 45 reached the bloodstream. Only vitamin D resulted in a significant amount of calcium 45 in the blood. Lumisterol and different high concentrations of testosterone did not. So they don't do anything that we know of. They just protect us from vitamin D overdose. How important is this protection? Very important, crucial, because the sun has the potential to produce a huge amount of vitamin D. In 1977, Dr. Trevor Stamp quantified this for us by comparing ultraviolet light therapy to different doses of vitamin D supplement. His light therapy protocol was done on 7 different people over 3 to 4 weeks. He starts them at 1 minute of full entire body exposure, then increasing by an additional minute each day. He pauses increases if the skin gets red. He did this to avoid burning the skin like a sunburn, but essentially was approaching the maximum daily vitamin D production, which, as we know, only takes minutes in full sun. The chart on the right shows vitamin D levels achieved over time with different supplements. The vertical axis shows a 25 OHD, which represents your vitamin D blood level. Normal is between 20 and 70. The blue lines show different doses of vitamin D supplement, from a reasonable 1,800 units to an enormous 40,000 units a day. The pink line shows ultraviolet light therapy simulating sunlight. This pink line mostly follows the blue line with a dose of 10,000 units a day, but it pokes a bit above, so some say the sun is 12,000 units a day. Still others insist it's 20,000 units a day because it seems like it would have eventually reached the blue line above. Despite the various interpretations, everybody cites this same study. Due to the same slope, I favor 10,000. 10,000 is a huge amount. The maximum supplement recommended by the US National Institute of Health is only 4,000 units a day. But even that is huge, especially considering that they recommend taking just a modest 400 to 800 units a day. Just a few minutes in the sun could equate to taking over 2 weeks of the recommended supplement. So, thank goodness for self-regulation with lumisterol to prevent overdose from the sun. The NIH designed their guideline for the average skin cancer-fearing American with minimal sunlight to raise your vitamin D level to a normal range above 30 nanograms per milliliter. Aside from avoiding sun, the average American lives not in tropical Florida, but lives above the 32nd northern latitude where the sun is too weak to produce vitamin D in the winter. In this region, which begins just below Los Angeles, vitamin D goes up and down by season. A Tasmania study, which would be the latitude opposite of Oregon, identified a predictable sine wave pattern that goes up by 15% by the end of summer and down 15% by the end of winter. The average for the entire US moves up and down similarly by season, but by 10%. So what if you don't act like the typical North American with minimal sunlight that the guideline relies on? Can we overdose with oral supplements? Yes, and let's take the worst case scenario that can fit within the NIH guidelines. Again, in most of America, the sun isn't actually powerful enough in the winter to give you any vitamin D at all. But if you spend a lot of time in the summer sun, max that 10,000 and then keep taking that 4,000 supplement on top of that, well, you might overdose. Not immediately, but built up over time. With too much vitamin D, you could eventually overload calcium and make kidney stones. So if you take a vitamin D pill, you should check with your family physician to see if you need your levels checked, occasionally. But from the research, you won't overdose from sun alone. Okay, let's bring this all together. Instead of turning into vitamin D, your body changes previtamin D into testosterone and lumisterol, mostly lumisterol, to protect you from overdosing on the sun. The two don't do anything else that we know of. They don't raise calcium, prevent skin cancer, prevent sunburns, or whatever. The precise way the body regulates this remains unknown. You get the most vitamin D from the sun in the first few minutes, but it takes longer to reach the maximum benefit. 30 minutes to max with white skin, but over 3 hours for the darkest black. But with enough exposure, both reach the same total vitamin D. Maximum sunlight benefit is like supplementing 10,000 units a day, which is enormous. When far from the equator, the sun makes no vitamin D during winter, so the best time to check if you're low is at the end of winter. Overdose remains possible if your source of vitamin D includes anything other than sunlight. If you take a pill, you may need your levels checked. Do the unknown mechanisms bother you? They bother me. But there's a difference in knowing nothing and knowing what we don't know. Now you know a bit of what we don't know.